Hey, well, welcome back to GunStuff. We're here in Washington, D.C. with Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky 4th District. We're so glad that you can take a little bit of time out of your busy schedule, and it is particularly busy today, isn't it?
It's very busy. There are weapons of mass distraction going off all over town, not the least of which is 3 floors under the visitor center. There's a fake impeachment hearing going on, and so I just came from that. And then there are so many other distractions here going on, but I am so glad you came to Washington, D.C. to talk to me about guns. This is my my gateway issue into the Constitution. I got my first gun when I was 12 years old. My dad bought me a 410 H&R single-shot shotgun. And he took me hunting with it, and I learned a lot with that gun. But then when I went to college in Massachusetts, after growing up in Kentucky, I'd heard about people that wanted to ban guns, but I'd never met one. And that was like 18 years old. I lived a sheltered life as far as the Second Amendment goes, thinking that everybody had an appreciation for it. And by the way, it's not about hunting, and I hope we'll get into that. But when I got into school and 18 years old and ran into people in the dorm room that were like, yeah, nobody should have a gun. It was like, wow, these people do exist. And then I discovered there are enough of them that exist that our rights are in danger. And it drew me into politics, frankly.
Well, when you say our rights are in danger, I'm assuming we're talking about the U.S. Constitution. And the Second Amendment has a historicity of self-defense, but it's more than just self-defense, isn't it?
It's self-defense against a tyrannical government is what it is. So as I became more politically aware, and a lot of this through the lens of the Second Amendment in the beginning, my litmus test for a politician was how did they answer questions about the Second Amendment. And if they talked about they were duck hunters and they supported your right to target practice and duck hunt, and even maybe your right to self-defense, when you're out and about with your family, but they never mentioned what the Second Amendment was truly about, I was always suspect of those politicians. And I'm even more suspect now here in Washington, D.C., serving with some of them. But the Second Amendment, by the way, it doesn't give us our right. Our right already exists. It's God-given. But the Second Amendment is there to protect our right to keep and bear arms against a tyrannical government.
Well, so when people are out there today, there's a lot of conversation in the marketplace and in the political arena talking about, well, there's particular firearms that people shouldn't have. Whenever there's a mass shooting, all of a sudden they go for the AR-15. And there are political candidates today that want to confiscate those weapons. Now, should anyone be able to purchase these weapons?
I think so. I mean, this is fundamentally the type of weapon, if you put it in the historical context, that our founding fathers were carrying. It was the same. In fact, they had better weapons than the British. They had Kentucky long rifles.
There you go, all right.
And which were better than the guns that the British were using. So they would have never fallen prey to this argument that, oh, well, you can have a firearm, but you can't have one as good as the military. I mean, that's a false pretense. People say, well, where do you draw the line? Can you have a nuclear weapon, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah.
Which those are just, fantasies or ridiculous questions. But if you're looking for a line to draw somewhere, I say, well, the police carry AR-15s because they believe they're going to need that weapon. And by the way, they also don't limit themselves to 10 rounds in their magazines. They're going to be carrying 30 round or 100-round magazines if they think they're going to need them. If the police believe they need a weapon to protect me when they finally show up and protect me or my wife.
2 hours late.
When seconds matter, the police are there in minutes or whatever. So Not to disparage them.
That's
They do a
right,
very
exactly. They're
important
stretched
job.
thin, right?
Right. And
You
by the way,
are your best.
most police support the right to keep and bear arms. I mean, you can look at all of the surveys that have been done of national police organizations, and they always come back strongly in support of law-abiding citizens' rights to keep and bear arms. But back to what I was saying is, if the police need that weapon to protect me when they finally show up, that's the same weapon I want before they get there. Because they're going to be arriving probably at a crime scene where everything's already over.
Well, a lot of folks say that the AR-15, even though it may be responsible for some mass shootings, for the majority of deaths in this country, aren't handguns to blame?
Oh my gosh, more people die from fists than die from AR-15s in a year. In fact, from all rifles. I mean, most criminals don't even use a rifle. And if you narrow down, people say, well, in a mass public shooting, this is why we got to get rid of AR-15s. Well, the fact of the matter is, 50% of all mass public shootings are committed only with a handgun. You know, for instance, like the Virginia Tech shooter,
Yeah.
32 fatalities, and that shooter had 2 handguns. So if you did want to ban AR-15s, which I think is ridiculous to do, you're not going to stop mass public shootings. In fact, I said 50% involve only a handgun, 80% involve some type of handgun, in addition to either a shotgun or a rifle. It's not going to stop mass public shootings. It's not even going to reduce the lethality of a shooting, because, I mean, handguns use a .45 round, okay? And I tweeted a picture of this to show people the difference between a .223, which is basically a .22 bullet, which is what the AR-15 shoots. It was designed to be a small caliber, not because it's more lethal than a .308 or a .30-06. It was designed so you could carry more ammunition. It wasn't designed to be more lethal. It was a pragmatic concession that we've got soldiers and they're going to have to carry all this ammunition.
Okay.
So for miles when they march. Well, that's not even a consideration for a criminal. They're going to show up in a vehicle, and they use them, I think, because a lot of when they do use them, which is infrequently, but when they do use them, I think it's because it's a copycat, because they've
heard about it.
They've heard about it. They've seen another shooter do it, and because the media portrays these as evil, they think it's like it will instill more fear, and it will make them more famous when their heinous crime is complete and they're dead.
Well, I'm really glad we came to get some enlightenment, because, frankly, I'm a little confused, because from what you're telling me, if the AR-15 is not really used in that many fatalities, why in taking them away from the public would not really change the amount of fatalities to guns? Then why are politicians so eager to make what they call assault weapons illegal?
Because it looks like they're doing something, and they're operating on emotion, not logic. And so much stuff here in Washington, D.C., and particularly the bad legislation, is all incentivized and fueled by emotion. And my colleagues, these legislators who introduce these bills, they're playing to the emotions of their constituents. And and that's why even though they say, well, we just want to do this and we're not going to take your other guns, you should be suspect of them, because when they do that, there's going to be zero reduction in crime, and they're going to come back for another bite at that constitutional apple and say, we've got to pass this law because we just found out everybody's using shotguns with buckshot, okay, now for mass public shootings. So they'll ban those, and then if they ban the shotguns, they'll come back and say, well, you know what we found out now? They prefer handguns because they're more concealable and therefore they're more lethal, and so we've got to ban those. Because they're not using logic, and because the solutions they propose are not really solutions and they won't stop any of the crime, they're going to come back and come back and come back. I got to give a couple of my colleagues, one who's still here, Eric Swalwell, but another who I served with, who ran for Senate and didn't win, is now running for president, Beto O'Rourke, Robert Francis, I'm not sure which name we should use. But they both are honest. They tell you they want to take them all.
Well, you know, that's not so bad, is it? At least tell us what you think, right?
I prefer an honest politician. Then at least you can defeat them at the ballot box. It's the ones up here who say, oh, you know, and some of the politicians I serve with, they have military histories. You know, they're veterans, but so they sort of put people at ease that they would never take away their right to defend themselves against any sort of evil. But then they get here and they do exactly the opposite, and they vote for legislation that infringes on your right to keep and bear arms.
You know, we started by talking about individual right to bear arms. There's some talk now that what they need to do is actually go after the shooters. So-called red flag laws. They think that they're going to be able to get in the mind of someone and figure out who should and who shouldn't have. That's been an influence and impacting a lot of gun owners, hasn't it?
Yeah, they're now getting into the realm of science fiction, and they want to solve pre-crime, and they want to convict the pre-criminals. And that's so ridiculous because, as you alluded to, you'd really have to not only read somebody's mind, but to see into the future and see everything that they might be exposed to. And, you know, for that to work, you would have to expand the net so great. You would have to take away so many innocent people's guns on the probability that one day they might commit a crime in order to have any effect on the actual statistics or the, you know, later after this bill were implemented, that it would basically create more crime because you would take away the rights of people to defend themselves. Let me give you an example. Okay, there's already a red flag law that people don't know about. I know about it because I've had true whistleblowers, okay, come to me, send me documents from the Veterans Administration. And by the way, it's in some sense these aren't whistleblowers because they're just pointing out to me things that I should be able to discover, but I hadn't discovered until they came to me. At the Veterans Administration, when you apply for disability, particularly if you try to go from 50% disability to 80 or 90% disability, you have an interview with a doctor, and they say, does somebody else manage your finances? And never answer yes to that question if you're a veteran, because what they will then do is they'll check a box and they start this process. They call it due process. It's not due process. You get a letter in the mail and you get one phone call alerting you that you've been put into this system where they're eventually going to take away not only your right to buy a gun, because you'll go in the NICS database, but they're going to take away your right to have one in the house if you already own one. They're going to take away your right to have ammunition in your house. And they will make felons out of you. So at the end of this so-called due process, what happens is the veteran receives a letter that says, oh, we have approved your disability application, and we're going to start sending you checks. And right behind that letter is another letter that says, under the Brady law, you are now ineligible to own or even possess a firearm or ammunition. Now, a veteran who receives that, first of all, if they're applying for disability, they're going to be a vulnerable person who needs to have some equities to protect themselves against somebody who's going to be stronger than them, right? So, second of all, if anybody deserves these rights, it's the people who are willing to die for these rights in defense of our country, right? And third of all, they need the money, the disability benefit that they've earned, and they are afraid that if they appeal the decision, because they can make an appeal, but they're afraid because that letter came at the same time in the same envelope as the letter that approved their benefits, that an appeal will cause them to lose their benefits. So most of them never appeal it, and they don't have the money to appeal it. I mean, if you're applying for disability benefit,
right, yeah.
You're probably could be nearly destitute, and if you have to choose between food and housing or your Second Amendment, that's a tough decision that no veteran should have to, particularly a disabled veteran, should have to make, but that's what they have to do. That's a red flag. That's a real, honest to goodness, red flag law that is in place, and the trigger isn't, do you have PTSD? Do you think about harming yourself or others? The trigger is, do you manage your own finances? And the trigger for these red flag laws in the states that have passed it, are just as arbitrary. Does your neighbor think you're a threat? In California, one of my fellow Congressman Doug LaMalfa from California, he had a constituent who was a rancher. I mean, a rancher needs a firearm to protect their livestock. Neighbor moved to the country, turned in the rancher, turned in this woman, said, oh, I think she's a danger. They came and took her firearms. She couldn't protect her livestock. But they also took her permit to own a gun and to carry a gun. And then when this all got resolved, they never gave her the permit back to own a gun, to carry a gun. She had to go through that whole process again.
Well, it doesn't sound, in her case, that sounds justified, and it sounds a terrible thing for veterans. We're talking about people that have given their limbs and their
Yes.
livelihood and their whole being to serve us and to defend our Constitution, and that's what we were talking about to begin with, and now they have that constitutional right taken away from them. That doesn't sound at all fair. It sounds to me like big government run amok, wouldn't you say?
That's absolutely what it is, and we've not just deprived them, by the way, of their Second Amendment rights and the things that they earned in defense of this country, but of due process. I am sorry, but unless you get to appear before a judge and a jury, and unless you're innocent until you're presumed innocent until you're proven guilty, that is not due process. That is not the way this country was founded, and that's, even the ACLU, by the way, is upset with California's new red flag laws because you're presumed guilty until you can prove you're innocent.
Well, Congressman, thanks for spending some time with us today. What kind of advice can you give someone that's kind of interested in their Second Amendment rights or even their First Amendment rights in the Constitution today? What can a person such as myself or just an ordinary person do?
I am glad you asked that question. This is going to be the most important thing that I say to your viewers, and that is, congressmen respond to pressure. Okay, the reason they're up here running around talking about gun control right now is because they're seeing pressure on the news, they're seeing pressure from their constituents who could vote for them. They're very concerned about their reelection. And so the best way you can keep them from passing unconstitutional legislation is to apply equal pressure or greater pressure from the other side. How do you do that? I always wondered myself what was the best way. Before I got on this side of the curtain and became a congressman, I thought maybe writing a letter, maybe sitting down and handwriting it would show the passion that I had. The reality is that letter takes 2 weeks to get through our mail system here in the basement. It's scanned for anthrax and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, okay.
And it's probably going to end up with a staffer and batched up and responded to with a form letter. And I'm sure some of your viewers have done that. Don't use a fax machine. I wouldn't even email, frankly. The best thing somebody can do who wants to put pressure back on Washington, D.C. to maintain their rights is to pick up a phone and make a phone call. And it used to cost a lot to make a phone call. It's going to be cheaper than a postage stamp now to make a phone call. If you make a phone call to your congressperson's office, and by the way, don't call somebody you can't vote for.
Okay.
They're not going to care. Like you could call some senator in another state that you're upset about. They may take your call. They may listen for a little while. The
But
staff
they don't
might.
care.
They're not even going to write it down. And and frankly, you can't blame them because they are working for the people that can vote for them. Everybody who's watching this show has 3 people to contact. 2 senators. Every state has 2 senators. And a person has only 1 congressman. Figure out who those 3 people are. Pick up the phone. Be polite with the staffer you call. Don't be rude. Get to the point. Don't, rattle around. And then when you hang up, ask 2 of your friends to call. Because if I get 3 calls on the same issue in one day, that's actually a hot topic. I represent 750,000 people. On any given day, I average about 10 phone calls to my office. You would think more people would call than that. So what I'm telling you is there aren't a lot of people calling. And if I get like 10 phone calls on one issue in one day, holy cow, we better put out a statement, right? We better put something on Facebook. we better send out a piece of mail and let people know where I stand on that. That's the way congressmen think, okay? And so that's the way to be most effective. Make a phone call, talk to a staffer, be polite. Don't tell them, I'll never vote for your boss ever again if they do this, because then their boss has no reason to listen to you ever again, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Just be firm and polite and tell them how passionate you are about this, and say, you know, you can say, this is my biggest issue when I go to the ballot box. This is, you know.
Well, what great advice, and great for our viewers, our GunStuff viewers, and gives us something that we feel that we can really do. And I think it makes sense calling your own congressman. In fact, you're our congressman, and we appreciate the time you spent with us today here on GunStuff TV.
Hey, thanks for putting out this show. Thanks for getting the word out, and I look forward to coming on again, Chris.
Hey, thank you. It's great.